For years before I got sober, I wondered, why can't I control my drinking and drug use? How can I learn to control my drinking and drug use? Why do I keep ending up in the same situations? For me, I learned that there was no magic pill, no magic method or app on my phone. This is what I learned from trying and failing to control my drinking.
I'm JT. I'm in my mid-30s, have a 10-year media career, and nearly a decade of sobriety. So how did another middle-class kid turn into a blackout drunk and a heroin junkie? More importantly, how did it change, and where do we go from here? This is my story.
So the reason this came up is because, I don't know about you, but I get served ads on social media all the time. And we all know how this works at this point, right? It usually has something to do with something we've searched or purchased or said out loud, how we're getting served ads. And so obviously I'm searching things about sobriety all the time. So I've been getting served ads for these alternatives to the 12 steps lately, like these self-help programs, these do-it-yourself or do-it-with-our-club programs to control drinking or stop drinking, basically new methods being served to me through advertising on how to stop or control drinking. Now, obviously, I would not use any of those methods now, but I've seen quite a few of them over the years. You may have been served some of these ads yourself. You may have heard of other people trying them or seen them online. I did a quick Google search and found hundreds right off the bat. And so it got me thinking about, as well as I went to a late night meeting last night, which was really fun. I had a bunch of really raw and new sobriety in the room, some young people, some people who were just in the rooms for the first time or coming back after a slip. And it's really got me thinking about controlled drinking and how I used to try to control my drinking, the methods I tried to take before I found my way in sobriety. And I'll preface this once again, as I have 1,000 times. I just answered a question about it in the mail in the last video, but I have seen other methods work for people. I do not believe that my way, which is the 12 steps, is the only way to get sober. It, from my purview, has been the most successful way for me and for other people that I know, but I have seen other methods, and I'm going to jump back to this, but there are some common things in the successful methods I've seen. So let's just start by talking about my experience with controlled drinking. I didn't even really know that that's what it was called when I was trying it, but very early on, I would say as early as, I started drinking and using heavily early in life. I'd say by 14, I was a drug addict and alcoholic. So by high school, I had already had scary experiences where I had the come to Jesus sort of situations where I go, ooh, I may kind of have a problem here. Of course, drug use and alcohol use and addiction is in my genealogy, so it was constantly being brought up by my mom, specifically my dad every once in a while. Everyone was aware of it and knew where my actions would probably lead, so I was faced with these questions quite early, but it never quite got bad enough in those early years that I really had to spend serious time or serious effort trying to fix the problem, so to speak. And that continued into college because my drinking ramped up big time and my consequences or close calls with consequences ramped up big time because my drinking was ramped up big time, and I got parachuted in, an alcoholic got parachuted in to a alcoholic bloodbath, which is college in America. So all these things were exacerbated. And I really started having to contemplate it really for the first time and seriously put thought into it and had even put a little effort into it when I first walked into the AA rooms. And if you've watched my story video, which is the first video I've done, you can kind of jump into this a little bit deeper. But the first time I went into the rooms was when I was in college. And it was a point where my parents said I'd gotten into some trouble. I'd been arrested for who knows what time in the many times I was arrested or had run-ins with the law. But they said, we will not support you in any way going back to school unless you are going to AA meetings. And so I did. And so what I really started thinking about during that time period, this is my junior year of college, was why can't I drink responsibly? And keep in mind, almost no one that I was around in college was drinking responsibly. But I did know people who, granted, drank irresponsibly a lot, but didn't seem to have the problems that I had, that could, during the week, not drink too much or not drink at all and just focus on their studies and focus on their life. They didn't have to drink to socialize. They didn't have to drink to be intimate with a member of the, whatever sex, someone that they were pursuing sexually or in dating. They didn't have to drink or use to fall asleep. They didn't have to drink or use to get up. And more importantly, they seem to be able to be just fine having a certain number of drinks in a night out where everyone else, from my view, everyone else seemed to be getting out of hand. And so I wondered, why can't I be like that? Why can't I just drink normally? And so I would try to force myself to only have a few, or I would try to only drink on the weekends. And this continued in many different ways until I finally got sober. There was a period, like I'm talking about, when in my junior year when I started going to AA, where I stopped drinking for a few months, about 6 months, but I couldn't stop other stuff like smoking marijuana or doing hallucinogens or doing opiates. And so I thought, well, I'm not drinking, I'm just doing this. And then to a degree, when I started doing opiates, OxyContin, and heroin really regularly, that was a method of controlled drinking for me, because I wasn't drinking as much, if not at all, because it was messing with my other high that I liked more. And if I stayed on the opiates, then that meant that I could just like chill on my couch and eat and watch TV. And then I wasn't causing problems with being out drinking and driving, getting so drunk that I did something embarrassing or said something to my girlfriend that made her hate me, or said something to a friend that I had to clean up the next day. That, in a way, was a method of controlled drinking. And then I even tried controlled heroin use. Yes, believe it or not, I wrestled with the same questions when I was deep in my heroin addiction of, man, if I could only just do heroin on the weekends. I got to find a way to only do heroin on the weekends. Maybe I can work this out so I can only do heroin in these little periods. And first note, if you find yourself, and I'm speaking to myself in the past in this way, but if you find yourself wondering if you can just do heroin on the weekends or try controlled heroin use, it's probably a good sign that there's a problem. Because if there is anyone out there who can do controlled recreational drug use, they've already figured it out. They don't have to wonder about it. So I want to talk about what the feelings were that I had when I would try these things. The feelings that I have of my skin crawling, of being uneasy when I would not have my drug or my drinking, is the same thing that was caused when I would try controlled drinking. I might feel a little bit better at first, but at a certain point, I always felt like I was missing out on something, that I needed this thing, that this thing was calling me that, oh, it's not that bad. I've come to learn now that this was my alcoholic and addict brain talking to me, telling me, hey, it's not that bad because you need to be back into this thing. My alcoholic and addict brain has an incredible way of tricking me into thinking that I don't have the problem that I have, and more so to thinking that I can do it in a controlled way, that I could actually do it like a normal person. And so from a pretty early point, I started having conversations with myself like, hey, maybe you just don't get this. Like, this isn't a special treat that you get in your life. You know, like someone who's a diabetic just can't have certain foods, right? Maybe that's the case. And I was so indignant about this. I was so resentful about this. Why don't I get this? I deserve this. I should be able to have the college experience. I should be able to go drink at a fun party or a wedding or a weekend trip or a theme party. I deserve that. And it wasn't until I was able to get past this, along with many other things, that I was finally able to get sober. But the point is that any of my efforts to control my drinking or drug use only led to more drinking and drug use for me. It never fixed any actual problems I had. And here's the thing. The reason that was the case is because the drinking, I didn't see the forest for the trees. I didn't see that the drinking was only, and the drug use was only a symptom of bigger problems for me. I was looking at it like I just couldn't crack the code. Like my willpower wasn't strong enough or wasn't smart enough to figure this thing out. But the reality is for me is the second I had a drink or a drug, everything else went out the window. Like I could be doing a good job of controlling and only doing it on the weekends. But then when I got to that weekend, I could never manage to just have a few drinks because once I had that first one, I was off the rails. I was in a new state of mind. A new JT had entered into the universe, one who was unable to control his actions. And it's an incredible downward spiral because I could never contain it to just those 2 or 3 days on the weekend because inevitably, I wouldn't even be able to control it to one night or a couple hours, and things would get so bad that I would end up in that cycle. I would wake up the next morning and realize, I took it too far, and have this demoralization, have these apologies I needed to make, have this referendum on my life and my lifestyle, and that would lead to more drinking and drug use. Before you know it, even if I found a way to go a couple weeks where I didn't drink during the week, or I was able to have just a couple drinks every couple nights, it would eventually and very quickly get to the point where all that would be rolling in to the next week. And we're off to the races again because I would have that demoralization. I would not want to face reality and I would start drinking or drugging again. And to be honest with you, the only thing that ever saved me from any of this when I was young was that I didn't have regular enough income. So not having money would eventually slow me down and never stop me because I'd always find a way to, bum it off somebody else or trick someone else or steal it or lie to get what I needed. But this is the point I'm getting at. When I see these new methods, these ads that are telling me, hey, try it my way. If AA didn't work for you, if you think AA, the 12 steps are a crock of shit, come try it my way. And I'm not knocking anyone. If you've tried one of these, you know someone who's tried one of these and it's worked for them, more power to you. I'm not calling this pseudoscience. I'm not saying that it's bogus. I think you could very objectively call the 12 steps a cult if you wanted to. It's just a cult that from my point of view has never hurt anybody and I'm happy to be part of. It's kind of like, maybe you could compare it to a church in that way. Maybe even a little more docile than a church in some cases. But what I have learned in the brief interactions I've had with these other methods is, number one, a lot of times they are actually using the traits of the 12 steps. They're just repackaging them in a different way. Or they're taking a few of them that worked for the founder and repackaging them and selling them to someone else. And by the way, I get it. Maybe fear or lack of connection that someone may have in going into a room of the 12 steps. It can be a big hurdle. The God thing, as I've done a video about, and I'd love for you to check that one out too, it can be a huge hurdle. There are things that I think are natural hurdles in the 12 steps. But I guess what I'm getting at is, like, for me, natural hurdles are the things that I couldn't get over in life. And in the grand scheme of things, the hurdles of the program, the things that I didn't think I could get past or didn't jive with me about the 12 steps, are really not a big deal in the grand scheme of life. Like, life is going to deal me and has dealt me before and since I've been sober many hardships that are a lot harder to jump over than just figuring out how I deal with God or figuring out how to go through the 12 steps, how to make amends to someone, how I feel about the validity of these things. And for a lot of people, including me, it really doesn't matter what those things are, because when I was at the point that I was willing and ready, I would have done anything to get to the point that I needed to get. And obviously, ultimately, if you don't know, in 12 steps, abstinence is the name of the game. And that's the method that I've taken, because I don't, and I've talked about this before, I don't really know. In fact, I believe that if controlled drinking was an option for me today, I wouldn't be interested. Because the bottom line is that now that I've gone through the program and I've lived this life of recovery and sobriety, it really doesn't make a difference to me that I can't have one drink here or only drink on the weekends or smoke a little pot every now and then. I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. That's the point. Because it took me going through the program to realize that I had actually real shit I had to work on in here. And by the way, there are many ways to work on those things. I think therapy is great. I think especially group and talk therapy are great. I think all sorts of self-reflection, work with professionals, I think all of those methods are helpful in getting to where you want to go. But again, for me, being able to figure out what those things were, my crippling insecurity, my crippling fears about my place in the world, financial insecurity, about what my worth and value are. Those are just a couple of the things that made me drink ultimately, that I didn't realize were causing those issues that wouldn't allow me to control my drinking. And one of the other things I see in these new methods that might pop up, whether it's an app or a book or a new program being advertised as an alternative to AA, is I don't know that, and again, I haven't dug in a ton to these things, so please feel free to let me know if this is a part of one or more of those, but I don't know that work is necessarily being done here. And I should probably just say that I know that the work that I needed to do on myself that really had nothing to do with drugs or alcohol was available to me and mandated through the 12 steps. And I don't know that I see that in some of these other methods. I've seen some great breakthroughs in people that are not AA, not the 12 steps, not NA, and not these other new methods too. I've seen people get it through religion. I've seen people get it through meditation. But in almost all of those cases, I will say that self-reflection, hard work on self, service work, and to many degrees abstinence are all part of those in those methods that I've seen other people get sober that aren't AA. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't try one of these things, or that someone shouldn't try them, or that they don't have merit. But what I will say is that if you realize that or think that what you need might be a full transformation, a full spiritual transformation, if your life isn't where you want it to be, and look, maybe this is all for naught, because I know for me and for a lot of people, especially before I got to the bottom, I thought that I really didn't need a full-on transformation, and that's why AA wasn't for me. So maybe I'm pointing to the wrong things here. Ultimately, if you can't get past why you can't figure out what's wrong with your life, this is where I was. I couldn't figure out why I couldn't just get it together. once I was able to crack open that lid of self, of ego, of what's going on in here and in here, and start really doing the work on that, and stop focusing on, okay, have a drink here, or don't have a drink here, or don't have a drink at all. That's when the breakthrough happened. And ultimately, I'm happy today. And even more importantly, I'm content today, because not every day is filled with joy. Some days are very difficult. Some days I don't have a smile on me, but I'm happy to wake up in the morning and I'm grateful for the life that I have today. And for me, the 12 steps are able to do that. And again, not discouraging looking into any of these things, not discouraging trying any of these things. But what I have noticed with many of these new methods is they do not appear to offer the real hard work and introspection that the 12 steps and some other methods appear to offer. And in my case, do offer. Okay, let's get the mail. Okay, both pieces of our mail today come from the last video on the shocking new data on how many drug overdose deaths there were in the year 2020. And if you'd like to view that video, it's the most recent one I've done before this one. Very easy to find. And the first comment comes from Kitters. Kitters says, having been on fentanyl patches legally and on the correct dose for about 5 years up to 100 mcg, I can appreciate how deadly this drug can be. I was terrified of the chance I could stop breathing. I can't imagine seeing how much is cut in illegal drugs. I'm told a lot of animal tranquilizers are being cut in as well. I only know this because I follow a guy who talks to addicts in Kensington, PA. When I was a volunteer EMT for a small community 30 years ago, I only ran into one drug overdose. Now it's becoming commonplace. I wouldn't want to go to a Zoom meeting either. I think it would make me feel even more isolated and make it easier to overdose alone. Thank you so much for the feedback, Kitters. And Kitters, I can't tell from this whether you are an addict or sober or not, but I think it's really fascinating that you had the experience of being actually prescribed fentanyl. And I actually tried prescription fentanyl, not from a doctor, but for recreational use at one point. I didn't like it, but like you, Kitters, I could immediately see how it would be so powerful when being cut and other things. So I think this is great, whether you are an addict, sober or not. You clearly, in fact, by reading this, I would probably guess that you're not an addict because you had the wherewithal to be able to realize what was going on in your experience being prescribed to it and make a decision based on that. So, if I was prescribed a prescription opiate, it would not go like that. Even if I realized what was going on, I would find a way to get more of it. And to your comment about Zoom meetings, yeah, look, it's really tough. And in fact, in this meeting I went to last night, it got brought up. It gets brought up all the time now that we're having in-person meetings again. Physical connection is just kind of part of the deal. It's just really hard to have sustenance in your life without physical connection with other people, especially other people who are going or have gone through this great challenge and breakthrough that we go through in sobriety. Thank you so much for your feedback, Kitters. Next, we're going to go to Carol Ann. Carol commented on the same video, but it was from Twitter when I posted it there. Carol says, holy crap, that's a scary stat, talking about how the 93,000 number, as well as that it's a 30% increase from 2019. Given the cutoff isolation that was 2020, I can only speak from the perspective of anxiety, depression, which was difficult to deal with last year. But those dealing with addiction and isolation/unknown, I could only imagine. Carol, thank you so much for your feedback. And by the way, I want this channel to be about all aspects of mental health and emotional health, which I think is actually a more apt way to describe it. Not just recovery addiction, the 12 steps, which is why I try to filter in all these different viewpoints, especially people who may not be sober, who may not be addicts. And Carol, I think your experience is just as valid and just as important for us to hear, because at the end of the day, I think we're all in kind of a similar boat. And the anxiety depression thing is, it's another world of pain of trying to get through life and dealing with those things. So I commend you for commenting. Please give us your feedback whenever you can. And that goes for you too. If you'd like to be part of the mail, you can, of course, comment here on this video. You can comment wherever I post them. That's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Feel free to DM me as well if you'd like to have a private conversation. Anything you DM me, I will keep private unless I ask you, because it gets so great I want to share. Don't feel any pressure that way. Anything that you comment on my public posts, they're fair game for the show. So that's all we got for this week. See you next time. Hey family, if you like what we're doing here and you want to see more, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Share it with someone who you think might benefit from watching this, and feel free to comment below. Love.